Welcome to the Thrive From Within podcast, where personal transformation meets functional nutrition, mindfulness, and purposeful action. I'm Dr. Alex Sandrow, and this is where we explore how to align, thrive, and become more from within. Welcome to Thrive From Within, your journey, your way. And in this episode, I'm actually going to get into how I got into the mineral space and mineral balancing to begin with, and why this matters so much to me. Frankly, it's become one of the core pillars on how I work with and help others really tap with inside themselves to bring out their best. And it's a cornerstone of my principle of know your hardware. So with that, let's dive into it. And I remember the first time actually where I heard the minerals and really it just connected. It was actually through none other than Dave Asprey, who, when he first launched his Dangerous Coffee, I was kind of there and around. I was actually at 40 Years of Zen where they were trialing that. And then soon after 40 Years of Zen, I actually was fortunate to have dinner with him. And again, the mineral talk came up. And it's kind of funny because when we were sitting there at dinner, he really was talking about how he thinks that this is one of the untapped or unturned rocks in healthcare, if you will. And to me, it was one of those things that it didn't really rattle my space so much, but it's just one of those things that you hear that sticks with you. And for me, that conversation still sticks to this day. I didn't really dive into the mineral space immediately, but it was more something that I just kind of bookmarked, if you will, and said, maybe I'll come back to that in the future. So fast forward, the shift that ends up taking place that really pulled me into the mineral space like full-fledged was, I forget the year, but I remember the month, that's for sure. It was February. And I was somewhere probably around 45, 46 years old. And all of a sudden, my health started slipping backwards. Now, here's the catch. I hadn't changed anything. I hadn't changed my dietary consumption. I hadn't changed my workout routines. I didn't recall any major stresses that were taking place in my life. I would have told you that just prior to that event or that series of events or that month, man, I felt like I was at the pinnacle of my health. My cognition was high, my athletic performance was high, my fitness was high, my metabolic health was dialed. And all of a sudden, that February, I start to see that the scale is starting to shift. And it wasn't shifting down, it was shifting full on up. And again, no change, like no change in diet, no change in anything like that. I'm thinking to myself, like, what the hell's going on? And that was really what pulled me into working with a slew of functional medicine practitioners here local to me. And we tried to turn every rock possible. And what came from that was everyone had a different theory, but we didn't make any meaningful progress. That's for sure. So fast forward, the second spark that really hits, where now the minerals become full circle back in my life, is of all people, once again, I'm actually listening to a Dave Asprey podcast, and he's got a guest on from DC, and I'm hearing her talk, and she's speaking about all these things that I'd never heard before, like reactivated viruses and all this kind of stuff. And I thought, really? That's interesting. So I ended up reaching out to Terry at that time, and she agreed to take me under her care and supervision. What I learned very quickly was that I actually was dealing with essentially a reactivated virus. It was a reactivated Epstein-Barr virus. That reactivation was the cascade that triggered a whole slew of things taking place. It started to really show up as a histamine intolerance for me, which pushed into a mast cell activation issue. Through that work, I then very quickly found out that I actually had a slew of sulfonation SNPs. And I realized that, wow, all of these healthy foods that we are told to eat by public media, which I had been full bandwagon chowing down on, in the wrong person and not knowing your hardware actually could be detrimental. And that's what it turned out, is that I was literally poisoning myself by eating all of the healthy foods. And wouldn't you know, after probably 6-7 months of working with Terry and pulling out a bunch of things, man, I started to feel like myself again. I actually recall a moment when I first moved to Central Oregon. We're here probably 2 years or so at that time. For me, this is kind of heaven on earth. It's kind of my place. It's an outdoor sports mecca for sure. And with an extremely active life, you go, okay, that's the place I want to be. And that's exactly what it was. So I get out there and I'm realizing, wait a second, my allergies are so bad. There is a real potential that I might need to actually move. So here I am, Central Oregon. It's kind of like the place, and I'm living the dream and it's awesome and everything. And I'm going, holy cow, having no stinking clue that I was literally poisoning myself by putting in all of these vegetables that were high in sulforaphane, which for many people, that's the compound that we're all taught these days. Hey, you should be consuming this as much as possible. And this was really when everything cemented. And there's some things previous to the mineral space and frankly the functional medicine space that I'll get into in future episodes for sure. But this is where, at least from the health standpoint, physical, biological health, this is where I really started cementing the idea of you have to know your hardware. Because if you don't, then you are asking potentially your system to do things that, quite frankly, it was literally not designed to do. So that became a huge foundation and a turning point for me. So back to me working with Terry. It's been over a year now. And things are good. The scale finally tipped back the other direction. And she and I are having, a couple conversations, and she starts bringing up a couple of minerals. Now, it wasn't necessarily to the degree where I am these days with regards to being involved in mineral space, but it was that moment of going, hey, this is a real thing that's not being totally evaluated. And it brought me right back to that conversation that I had with Dave Asprey at dinner that night at the biohacking conference. I thought, wait a second, this whole thing that I've been experiencing is potentially being driven by minerals, or at least mineral imbalances. And soon after I started going down that rabbit hole, and as a human design generator, that's kind of how I'm built. My profile is a 1-3. If any of you know anything about human design, it's just, I can go down a rabbit hole of research and make it practical and then bring it back to the masses for delivery. And through that short window is where I came into HTMA testing, hair tissue mineral analysis. And I thought, holy cow, this will be something worth going down to see if it actually holds any credence to it. And I have all these things going on the other side. One of my issues with medicine, both as a practitioner as well as how it's being practiced, unfortunately, is that it's what I refer to as a red ocean market. And that was a concept that I was introduced to probably 10 years ago, where when I went into my sports medicine practice, we very quickly became known as the clinic that if you had something going on that ortho couldn't figure out and PT couldn't figure out and other chiros couldn't figure out, those providers and docs in the area would say, hey, go see this clinic. I don't know what they do over there, but they have a way of working with and seeing things differently than others providers. And that was what we built our reputation on, not really understanding that it was totally a red market, meaning that if in a given month we had 40 new patients that came in, it's not as if all of a sudden 40 new patients moved into our one little location geographically all in the same month and said, hey, we need a new chiro sports med group to work with. That's not what happens at all. What happens is that we will survive and thrive because we are taking from other people. For me, that was a philosophy that when somebody put it like that in front of me, I thought, yeah, I don't want to be that. I don't want to be that kind of practitioner. I don't want to participate where I'm taking something from somebody else. In the mineral space, the way that I look at it these days is really it helps all of the other providers in the area, whether they're virtual or not. So it's not a taking, so to speak, but it's more that all of the foundational pieces that we do in mineral work actually help emphasize and create greater success for all the other practitioners in the area. And for me, that was huge. It was a really big deal. So it was something I was very cognizant of when deciding that I wanted to go into this other direction that is known as a blue ocean market, where it's not about this idea of competing, it's more about collaboration. And again, it's really allowed me to amplify the other practitioners, the work that they do, the great things that they do for their patient population. So it complemented everyone else. It wasn't competing. And that for me was a really big draw. Fast forward, I get into the HTMA space and I quickly realize, hey, this isn't necessarily a functional lab that's diagnostic per se, but man, it sure has the ability to reveal some really interesting things that might be taking place. And at least it starts to check boxes in many people's health, is what I have learned, having done this now for a while. That otherwise would go unchecked. It starts to give us an idea of what the body is ready for example. And what I mean by that is there's often the case when we're working with optimizing functional health, we want to throw this supplement and this thing at that and this medication potentially. We just assume that the body is going to be able to do that. Just as an example of one of my kids, this is a feel like bad parent moment, especially knowing that this is my specialty. So when I end up running an analysis and I find out that she's in this pattern that we refer to as four lows, basically says that her system does not have the ability with its current state to actually be able to take in and utilize all of the medications we've thrown at her for years, or all the supplements that we've thrown at her and the other providers that we've seen. Her body just doesn't have the ability to do that. As a matter of fact, if we start to add too much into a system that's not ready for it, we actually do more harm than good. It was probably legit a couple of years of us and all these different providers and practitioners juggling this supplement and that supplement. I can't tell you how many thousands of dollars we've spent on supplements trying to help her get ahead and thrive. Only to have that aha moment and go, holy crap, she's actually in a four lows pattern and her system literally doesn't have the ability to process all of these things that we're throwing at her. It very quickly brought me down kind of memory lane and thinking to myself, man, for years she's been telling us that these medications make her feel awful and these supplements don't make her feel good. And this was her being in touch with her body all along, and us just not having the ability to separate ego from intuition and step out and go, okay, let's figure out what this is. So it really does, the HTMA process for me really helps me get a window into what's potentially going on there and where I can move in, and maybe things that I need to prep before. It also functions as a great space for me to give me an idea in terms of like what people are potentially holding on to, what kind of toxic minerals, what kind of heavy metals. Again, it's not necessarily diagnostic, but it sure opens up the potential of looking into places that otherwise would not be looked at. And that's, to me, is a huge deal. One of the things that I'll throw out there is understanding sometimes that we have interference. So if you're looking at things like aluminum and mercury, arsenic, which I'm finding here in Central Oregon is something that is a common problem, how those actually impact and interact with somebody's basal foundational system is tremendous. And when we can identify these things and we can start mineral balancing according to what is taking place in that window of time for somebody, it's huge. What I have found is that many clients or patients tend to be over supplemented, and oftentimes they're self-prescribing them based on whatever trends are going on in public news and media. And they'll try this and they'll try that. They've got a friend that did this thing and then that thing. Again, if you don't know your hardware, then you're just throwing darts against a board that doesn't have a bullseye, let alone blindfold. So again, it really gives me a great window in helping somebody optimize where they need to be with their minerals, because every other enzymatic reaction that's going to take place within that body is going to start with minerals. It's one of the reasons why magnesium is the mineral of talk these days. It's responsible for like 500 plus different enzymatic reactions. And we go, is it really a big deal? It's a huge deal. And then understanding that not all magnesium is created equal. And, this brand and that brand, they use different forms and some are more bioavailable. Like, it's a really, really big deal. And again, I'll keep hammering this and you'll hear this more and more, but it does come down to knowing what your hardware is. Part of knowing that, one of the great things is that you very quickly start to understand the things that you need to remove that are interfering first. I would tell you that it's gotten to the point where I have found it to be so helpful in such a profound way that I am now starting to branch out and working with animals as well here locally and not necessarily locally, but I started here locally with one of the well-known docs in our area who works in a very holistic practice. So excited for that. That's kind of how I got into the mineral space. A little bit of background. In future episodes, we'll be exploring things like different ratios and what those ratios mean, why they're important, how certain ratios can show us potentially what's taking place. In a nervous system, for example, we can get a good idea on which somebody's nervous system is doing, whether it's tending towards parasympathetic drive or sympathetic drive, and how we can go ahead and use mineral nutrition, diet, and lifestyle to really make like massive and rapid changes in that. So we'll get into some of that. And other than that, thank you for joining. And by all means, you can follow me on some of the social media channels. One in particular, subscribing to the Proactive Pulse, which is a writing space that I use over on Substack. You can also download the free 5-day mineral guide that I've put together if you are one of those individuals that is wanting to learn a little bit more about the mineral space and why it potentially is important and how it might benefit you. It's a free 5-day email guide that will be dripped into your inbox over the course of a 5-day window. Very small, bite-sized snippets that you can learn from and some actionable steps along the way. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast, and I look forward to speaking to you guys in the future. Make it a great one. Thanks for tuning in to the Thrive From Within, your journey, your way. If this resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Connect with me and join the conversation over on Substack at the Proactive Pulse. You'll find deeper insights, tools, and reflections to support your journey. You can subscribe for free at proactivepulse.substack.com. I'd love to have you there. And if you know someone who needs this, share it forward. Until next time, keep aligning, keep thriving, and keep becoming more from within.